Again, we're finishing Leviticus. And as I know I've been discovering this year and going through it, there's a lot more here than we realize. There's a lot more connections to the New Testament. There's a lot more connections to Yeshua than I could have guessed, because we're not taught how to see it. In fact, how many of you typically avoided Leviticus most of the time? Yeah, so me included. But if you remember, what happens to the patriarchs, the belief, the understanding, the interpretation is that what happens to the patriarchs often gets represented or lived out in the future with their descendants, and even with Messiah himself. So just like what you see with Moses, where he patterned the tabernacle after what was shown to him on the mountain, in Hebrews talks about that in terms of the heavenly tabernacle that's set up, that is functioning, that for Yeshua to enter into the Holy of Holies and present his blood that is better than the blood of bulls and goats. Even things in here in these last chapters, 25 through 27 of Leviticus, the systems that God instructs and what he shows them, how he wants them to live, also speaks to the kind of world that he wants to govern. It speaks to the kind of world that he is going to reveal and show in his kingdom. And so we get to see some elements of that here. It's like what Isaiah chapter 2 talks about, where the Torah, the nations come to Jerusalem to learn his ways, and the Torah goes forth from Zion. And so again, this Torah portion gives us insight through things that we are going to look at and study with the Shmeta, with the Jubilee, and how that connects to the Messianic era. So this Leviticus and the Messianic era is what's here. For the Israelites, when they left Egypt, when they were leaving Egypt, the journey to the Promised Land, none of them could have ever guessed that it was going to be 40 years before they went into the Promised Land, right? That's not that long of a trip. Would it take you 40 years to get to Knoxville? I mean, if it takes you that long, something happened, something's wrong to slow you down. They spent the year making the tabernacle at the base of Mount Sinai. They went forward to the land. They were preparing to enter, but they hadn't really coalesced as a people, as a nation yet. In many ways, they weren't really ready for it yet. So when they got there and they sent out the 12 spies, y'all remember that? The 10 of them came back with the bad report of saying how difficult it was going to be, how large the people are, how the cities are fortified. It's just going to be too much for us. Everybody then freaked out by all of that, and they refused to go in. And as a result of all of that, they had to wander for 40 years. But even later, when you get to Joshua, when they are finally moving in, they went where Moses couldn't take them. And the crossing over into the Promised Land symbolically is like crossing over into the kingdom of God, into the reign of Messiah. That's how it's understood. Taking that step over represents going in, moving into the kingdom of God. Escaping out of Egypt, the place where you're supposed to go, is the kingdom. That's how Paul understood it. That's how he describes it, even in the book of Colossians, where it says he has rescued us from the domain or the dominion, the authority, the power of darkness. He has brought us into the kingdom of the Son whom he loves. It's in him we have redemption, the release of sins. And this word, that word there at the end, the release of sins, that's an important part that connects significantly here into chapter 25 of Leviticus. It's an important connection for Paul. In any of the Jewish people of his day, many of those, even the Jews who lived out away from the land in the diaspora, they would have been, Paul himself, he was from Tarsus. So when Paul is reading the scriptures, he's primarily drawing and reading from the Septuagint, right? Y'all know what that is? That's the Greek translation of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, written about 200 years before Yeshua came. And that word release that he uses there in Colossians is aphesis, which means to release from bondage or imprisonment. But it also, some of your translations might say, the forgiveness of sin. So it means that as well. And I can see why Paul would use this word. But this word shows up several times in these last chapters of Leviticus in the Septuagint. Several times. Here's a couple of examples. This is from the Septuagint. It says, "You shall sanctify the year, the 50th year, and ye shall proclaim a release," the aphesis, "upon the land to all that inhabit it. It shall be given a year of release, a jubilee, a yovel, for you. And each one shall depart to his possession, and ye shall go each to his family." Verse 11 says, this is a jubilee of release, aphesis. That word, the exact word again. "The year shall be to you the 50th year. You shall not sow nor reap the produce that comes of itself from the land, neither shall ye gather its dedicated fruits. For it is a jubilee of release. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its fruit off the fields. In the year of the release, the jubilee of it, shall one return to his possession." Are you noticing that it shows up a lot? Right? So many of the words that are related to the Jubilee, the Yovel, they're not used in the New Testament at all. So like if you're looking up in your Strong's or some of your other tools to try to look up things, you're not going to get any entry for several of these words that are related to this topic, except for this one. So many of when you get to other verses here in chapter 25 and 27, instead of even saying the Jubilee over again, it just speaks of it in terms of the aphesis, in terms of the release. And that idea of the release means the year of Jubilee, that 50th year. And so when Paul uses that word, the release of sins and the kingdom of the Son, he's putting those things together on purpose. And his readers, if Jewish readers who are familiar with the Septuagint, would go here to Leviticus about the year of Jubilee. And so these chapters describe this special time, these years and practices that in many ways, I believe, characterize what the kingdom of God, what the kingdom of the Son is going to be like. And we've looked at some of these. Adonai said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to Bnei Israel and tell them, when you come into the land, and when you come into the kingdom, when you enter into the reign of Messiah, which I give you, then the land is to keep a Shabbat to Adonai." How do they do that? It says, "For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there is to be a Shabbat rest for the land, a Shabbat to Adonai. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard." So, in the same way that the people, we're supposed to get a day, a rest, how often? Every 7 days, right? In the same way that we're supposed to get a rest every 7 days, the land is supposed to get a rest every 7 years. Just like their animals and their male and female servants are not supposed to work on the Sabbath, the land is not supposed to work in this 7th year. But there's a great difference about this 7th year that is significant for the kingdom. Because you'll notice they're not supposed to sow, they're not supposed to prune the vineyard, and then all the normal things that you would do as somebody who has fields and farms and vineyards, all those normal things that you would do to ensure that you have a harvest and increase, a full harvest, don't do those. Just like you don't do any of your regular work on Shabbat, you don't do any of your regular techniques and things in this year. Instead, whatever the Shabbat of the land produces will be food for yourself. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll make enough to feed me, right? But it's going to be enough food for yourself, for your servant, for your maidservant, for your hired worker, and for the outsider dwelling among you, even for your livestock and for the animals that are in your land. All its increase will be enough food. That kind of hurts my brain a little bit about how that's supposed to work. Because don't do anything in that seventh year that you would normally do. Don't till, don't put out seed, don't weed, don't fertilize, don't do all the tricks. If you've got Facebook or you've got any YouTube and you see all the different reels of how to watch those little videos of how to make your peppers or your tomatoes grow. Anybody else seeing like dozens of those all the time? Okay, don't do any of that. And don't do that, and the land is still going to produce enough food for your entire household, including the animals. It's almost as if in that seventh year you're getting a glimpse or a taste of what the Garden of Eden must have been like, because it's producing, that they had enough food to eat. Adam and Eve did, right? They had plenty. They were not going hungry. When Eve took bite from the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she didn't do it because she was hungry or lacking or desperate or starving. She had plenty. But just like the garden produced enough for Adam and Eve, that seventh year is going to produce enough for them. Just like the Israelites, they were miraculously given bread and quail for those 40 years, except on what day? Except on Shabbat. That kind of gives you the impression that God knows how to provide for his people. Is that true? Does he know? Can he make things happen that don't make sense? Yeah. The land, the reality is this earth, this land, does not need us to work it in order for God to produce enough for us to eat. And I believe the kingdom is going to be a lot like that. Hebrews calls it the Sabbath rest that is to come. He says, again, God appoints a certain day, today, saying through David, after so long a time, just as it has been said before, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, some people think, well, they received all of those promises. They entered the rest when Joshua led them in. It's like, no. If Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. And so there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So every 7 days we are supposed to get rest. Every 7 years the land is supposed to get rest. And again, this is all picturing and showing and pointing us toward this Sabbath rest that is to come in the future. And the land is supposed to produce enough. And we're not supposed to worry about what we shall eat or what we shall drink in those times. Practicing that seventh year, that Shmeta year, reveals a trust and a faith in God that he is going to take care of us. He is going to take care of his people. He is going to provide that rest for them. And so that by doing so, by obeying these kinds of things, then it would reveal the hope in the future and the promise of the kingdom of God. Yeshua talked about it a lot like that. Remember this passage. So I say to you, Matthew 6, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. For isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing? I bet they would, when they came upon the seventh year and they were like, man, are we going to do this or not? I bet they were asking those kind of questions a lot. He says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns. They don't do anything that I'm telling you not to do, right, in the seventh year. Yet your Father in heaven feeds them. And are you not more valuable than they? Therefore, do not worry, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear? Again, these are questions for the Shmeta year. Those are the kind of questions that talk you out of doing it, right? Because for the pagans eagerly pursue all these things. They have no hope. They have no promise. They're strangers to the covenant. They're not going to even know about this stuff, and so they would never do what I've asked you to do. And yet your Father in heaven knows that you need all these things. He hasn't forgotten any of that. Even in asking you to do these things, it's not like he's not thinking about providing. But seek first, what is it? The kingdom. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. This is what rest in the kingdom is supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like God providing. And on the flip side of that, that also is supposed to be us not worrying. Which one's the hard part? It's the us not worrying part is the hard part. But what's amazing, how this is supposed to work during that 7th year, during the Shmeta, this is what the Jewish men who now have all of this time to do various things because they're not out in the fields doing all of their normal things. They're supposed to seek his kingdom and seek his righteousness. They have more time to study the Word. They have more time to study the Torah. Practicing the Shmeta logically doesn't make any sense. But it requires a complete and total trust in God, and it's a trust that starts even before the 7th year comes. You have to trust him in more like the 6th year or before that. Really starts before the 7th year. It says, now if you ask, this is Leviticus 25, what are we to eat during the 7th year if, see, we are not to sow nor gather in our increase? Does that not sound like Yeshua's question? Now I will command my blessing to you in the 6th year, so that it will yield a harvest sufficient for 3 years. When you sow during the 8th year, you'll still be eating the old, stored harvest until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. They ask those questions. What are we going to eat during the 7th year? They ask that question before the 7th year even comes, before even seeing the harvest of the 6th year. And I believe, this is how I understand this works. They're not going to see the abundant harvest unless they've already decided that they're going to, if they're already resolved to keep the 7th year Shmita. If they're saying, you know what, I don't really trust God that he's going to provide for us if we don't do anything in that 7th year, I think we're going to probably do it anyway, then they're never going to see this harvest for 3 years. Because they already have proven they don't trust and they don't believe. They won't see that harvest because it's never really been done. The Shmita, the 7th year, has never really been done. Even today, when in Israel, they find workarounds when they designate the 7th year. Many of them they'll sell their land to a Gentile for a year. And then they are able to work the land and do all the things that they're not allowed to do. And then it will automatically revert back to them after that year's over. There's ways that they get around it. And it really shows a lack of faith because it doesn't make sense. Not just in God, but also in that future, in that kingdom that he's talked about. Because in that year, in that rest, when they're not focused on the fields, when they're not worried about preparing the land, not sowing, not weeding, not pruning, doing all those normal things, again, they have more time to spend with Adonai. They have more time to spend with family. They have more time to study His Word. They have more time to learn something new, a new skill, a new trade. Because even in that 7th year of rest, it says don't sow and don't prune. Does that mean they just have to sit around for a year and do nothing? No, that's not what that means at all. There is still work to do, even during a time of rest. Even Adam had a job despite the garden providing everything for him. Right? Adonai Elohim, this is Genesis 2, took the man and gave him rest. Or placed him in the Garden of Eden in order to cultivate and watch over it. That word for give him rest is yana. It means to rest, settle down, and remain, to repose or be quiet, to cause to rest, right? You see all of those things, to set down, deposit, or place, to remain or leave. Rest was there in the garden. The first full day of Adam's existence was which day? He was created on the 6th day. So the first full day of his existence was what day? The Shabbat. The 7th day. Rest is what we're looking forward to. Rest of the kingdom is all of that. But again, if we're resting, why does Adam still have a job? Why, if the land can produce without us doing anything enough to feed us all, why do we need to work it at all? Because again, rest does not necessarily mean doing nothing. He had work. He had to work, or he had to cultivate and watch over. Work comes from the word abad. It's talking about service or being a servant. When you're doing what God tells you to do, when being obedient to Him, this word abad is actually sometimes translated a different way. You see it in Exodus chapter 3, when God is telling Moses his task in returning to Egypt. He says, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will abad. That's the form of that word. You will worship me. You will serve me. You will serve God on this mountain. Are you supposed to worship and serve God even on the day of rest? Even during a year of rest? Yes. You worship Him. You could say that Adam was placed in the garden to serve and to worship God, but also to watch over it. That comes from a word that we see more often is samar, which means, or comes from the word samar, which means to guard, to keep, or to observe. And that's an important word because it's associated with obedience. It's associated with the idea of covenant. God also said to Abraham, this is Genesis 17, as for you, my covenant, you must samar, you must guard, you must observe, you must keep. You and your seed after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant that you must keep, you must guard between me and you and your seed after you. All your males must be circumcised. That's that whole covenant of circumcision. So from the very beginning, in the garden, in innocence, in perfect rest, we will still be serving and worshiping God. We will still be keeping, guarding, and observing, being obedient to His covenant. That stuff doesn't go away. So what will we be doing in the kingdom in that Sabbath rest that is to come? Does that mean we'll be serving and worshiping Him and then keeping and guarding the covenants? See how that works? Because we'll be able to do that because we have experienced what Paul talked about, the release of our sin. The serving God and guarding His covenant with our lives. This is always will be the job of the people of God. This will always be our purpose. We will always have this goal, this idea, this something to accomplish, this purpose of living, worshiping Him, and keeping His covenant. Leviticus 25, he says, therefore, this is from our Torah portion this week, you are to keep or do my statutes and observe, or that comes from the word samar, simru, my ordinances, and carry them out so that you may live securely in the land. So this 50th year of Jubilee, of Yovel, this year of release, parallels the pictures of all of that. It even pictures this, what we're doing now with the counting of the Omer, which ends next week. Right? How many days, how many Sabbaths are we supposed to count? 7, right? And so then on the 50th day, right, the anticipation and expectation of the greater harvest that is promised and is coming. You know, you saw that even in the pages of the New Testament in the book of Acts, where they, on the 50th day, what we typically call the day of Pentecost, the Spirit of God comes down upon them. Did they have a harvest that day? Yes. About 3,000 came to believe. Again, this is a picture of the kingdom that we are waiting for, that we count the days for. You know, we say or we sing about Bo Yeshua Bo, come Yeshua, in anticipation of Messiah. And that's why there's even that one of the standing prayers that we'll get to in a little while, the Amidah, to count the days until his arrival. Right? The counting increases anticipation. Speedily cause the offspring of your servant David to flourish, and let him be exalted by your saving power. For we wait all day long for your salvation. Blessed are you, Adonai, who causes salvation to flourish. We count the days until he comes, until he returns in power and glory. So what will this Sabbath rest? What more do we learn about the kingdom from the ending of Leviticus? We've seen the word of an important word a couple of times. This rest that we're waiting for and counting and anticipating is defined by a return. You know, Leviticus 25:13 says, in this year of Jubilee, in this Yovel, each of you will return to his property. His people will return from wherever they are, wherever they have been scattered, wherever they had to go, they'll return. There's going to be a return. You know, the land today, as we see it today, is now filled with more Jewish people than anywhere else on the planet. You know, it's been like that. There are more Jews in Israel than in America or any other nation. But it's only been like that for what, less than 20 years? It's been less than 20 years that more Jewish people actually live in the land than somewhere else. And it's as if we are witnessing in many ways a preliminary vision or picture of the greater exodus, of the harvest, of the ingathering. We sang about it earlier, but Yeshua talked about it in Matthew 8. Moreover, I tell you that many will come from the east and the west, and they will recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. This is that gathering. This is that return that they're waiting for. And it's reclining at the table. Again, we talk about this one around Passover. But because Yeshua is confirming what he's saying in this, in this statement, is confirming the words of Zechariah, who himself echoes the words of the Shmeta and the Jubilee to include even the many Gentiles. Zechariah chapter 8 says, thus says Adonai Tzavaot, behold, I will save my people from the land of the east and from the land of the west. It's almost like Yeshua has read Zechariah before. Because I will bring them back, and they will live in the midst of Jerusalem. They will be my people, and I will be their God in truth and righteousness. This, for there will be a sowing of shalom, a sowing of peace in verse 12. This is the abundance of that day that's going to be like the Shmeta, like the Jubilee. It says, the vine will yield its fruit. The ground will produce its increase. The heavens will give their due, and I will cause the remnant of this people to inherit all these things, all the promises. And in this prophecy with Zechariah, even the Gentiles are supposed to be a part of that fulfillment. Verse 22, he says, indeed, many peoples and powerful nations will come to seek Adonai Tzavaot in Jerusalem and to entreat the favor of Adonai. Thus says Adonai Tzavaot, in those days it will come to pass that 10 men from every language of the nations will grasp the corner of the garment of a Jew, will hold on to the tzitzit of the Jew, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. And so all God's people will be gathered. Those that unite themselves, those that come to the Jewish people, come to Messiah, will go with them. And we'll all return to the kingdom of promise. We're no longer strangers to the covenants of promise. We'll all be a part of that inheritance. That's what Peter expected. We talked about this in 1 Peter chapter 1. He says, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Yeshua the Messiah. In his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Messiah Yeshua from the dead. And it's an incorruptible, undefiled, and unfading inheritance. From a promise that's never going to be broken, has been reserved in heaven for you. And by trusting, by faith, you are being protected by God's power for the salvation ready to be revealed in the last time, in those days when the kingdom is coming. You know, he is still waiting and expecting and counting the days. Peter is. He's counting the days for that inheritance to be fully revealed and that salvation to be fully revealed in that last time, and that's the time of the kingdom. So the kingdom is defined by a return, but it's also talking about that abundance of provision. You know, these passages talk about them eating their fill. They've got this harvest that is lasting for 3 years. And we've read some of those things. He also talks about them living securely or living in safety, living in shalom in the land in the days of the promise, in the days of the Jubilee and all of that. He says, therefore, you are to keep my statutes and observe my ordinances and carry them out so that you may live securely in the land. And then the land will yield its fruit, and you may eat your fill and live there in safety. So what does that tell us about the kingdom? You know, in the kingdom, when Messiah is on the throne, there won't be any October 7th. In the kingdom, there won't be any assassinations of a young engaged couple. That's not going to happen. Those kind of things will not happen when Messiah Yeshua is on the throne, because he is the Prince of Peace. He is the King of Salem, right? That's how Hebrews talks about it. He says in chapter 26, he says, I will bring shalom in the land, and you will lie down with no one making you afraid. There's a lot of fear in this world. In that day, there will be no one to make you afraid. I will remove the dangerous beasts from the land, and I don't believe that dangerous beast is just talking about animals. You know what I'm talking about? There's a lot of people that qualify with a word like that. I will remove the dangerous beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through your land. So you will live securely, live in safety. Chapter 26 talks about the There won't be the kind of cheating each other or deception, though. Everything will be fair and honest kind of transactions. There won't be any idolatry in the kingdom. That's chapter 26, verse 1, where he says, "You are not to make any idols for yourselves." When you're in the land, this has no place in it. This has no part in who you are. Make no idols for yourselves, nor raise up an engraved image or a standing stone, or place any carved stone in your land to bow down to it. Again, that goes back to last week with, does God care about worship and how we worship? Yes. It's not an anything goes, because he is Adonai, our God. So there'll be none of those things. Instead, there'll be Sabbath and feast keeping. There'll be reverence. He says, you are to keep my Shabbatot, the plural, you will keep my Sabbaths, all of them, in his kingdom, and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am Adonai. After all, Torah is going forth from Zion. The nations are coming to Jerusalem. They're being taught his ways. They will be learning what it means to keep his Shabbatot, his Sabbaths. They'll be learning what it means to rest in Messiah. They'll be learning about his appointed times and coming to meet with him. That's a part of the kingdom to come. And he will tabernacle, or he will walk among us. Chapter 26, verse 11, he says, I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul will not abhor you. I will walk among you and will be your God, and you will be my people. That's very close. That's a very personal language. Even in building the tabernacle, the sense of him walking among them, that goes all the way back to the garden. And in the first century, in that Jewish thought, the one who is the visible, tangible radiance of his glory, the imprint of his being, is the Word, is the memory. Y'all heard me talk about that a lot before. Is the Son. What's interesting about this verse, when you look at it in the Aramaic, in the Targum, it's Adonai who is supposed to walk among them, but it says, and I will set the Shekinah of my glory among you. This is that Aramaic version. It says, and my word, Memra, shall not abhor you. But the glory of my Shekinah shall dwell among you, and my word, my Memra, shall be to you for a redeeming God. And you shall be unto my name for a holy people. That word, that Memra, shall be their Redeemer. The same word who redeemed them from Egypt. The same Memra who redeemed them from Egypt. Exodus chapter 3 puts it like this in the Targum. It says, I have revealed myself to thee this day, that by my Memra, by my word, they may be delivered from the land of the Mitzrayim, land of Egypt, to bring them up out of the unclean land unto a good land, and large in its boundaries, a land yielding milk and honey. I'm taking them out of the kingdom of darkness, and I'm delivering them where? Into the kingdom of the Son whom he loves, into the kingdom of the Word. The promise of the presence of Adonai and the presence of the Word echoes through this last Torah portion in Leviticus of all places. And it's what John the Apostle was looking at, was believing as well, as the promise is there in the opening of his book, brought to us through the Word. In the beginning was the Word. And he would have drawn from this idea of the Memra. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and all things were made through him. And apart from him, nothing was made that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it. And in verse 14, the Word became flesh and tabernacled, walked among us, just like Leviticus was promising. We looked upon his glory, the glory of the one and only from the Father, full of grace and truth. It's the Word, it's the Memra, who is the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, who delivers, who frees us, releases us, who rescues us from the dominion of darkness. And it's no wonder when Yeshua's first public speaking at his synagogue in Nazareth, he was reading a passage out of Isaiah that was connected to Jubilee. You know, who knew that Leviticus could teach us so much about the kingdom, so much about Messiah, so much about our future and our hope. But we need all of this. Understand who he is and what he has done for us. The book ends, these are the mitzvot which Adonai commanded Moses for the children of Israel, the Israel, on Mount Sinai. So let's stand together and we can say this last phrase. Stretch your legs a little bit. So as we finish this out, Chazak, Chazak, Vanit Chazek. Be strong, and let us be strengthened. Father,